Here's what they don't tell you about starting over at 37. Everything costs more than you remember. The security deposit on this studio apartment in Las Cruces took my entire savings. The electricity deposit cleaned out my checking account. Even the dollar store feels expensive when you're counting quarters for ramen. 6 months ago, I lived in a 4,000 square foot adobe house with a pool and mountain views. Now I'm staring at water stains on a popcorn ceiling, wondering how I managed to destroy my entire life with one conversation. At the time, the ultimatum seemed reasonable, necessary even. After 12 years of marriage, I thought I held all the power. I was wrong about that. Wrong about everything, really. But especially wrong about Diego. We met when I was 24, fresh out of UNM with a communications degree and absolutely no life plan. I was working at a gallery in Old Mesilla, pretending I understood art while really just enjoying the free wine at openings. Diego was 31, already established as one of the most sought-after civil engineers in southern New Mexico. He came to an opening with clients, trying to impress them with culture he freely admitted he didn't understand. "What do you think of the piece?" I asked, gesturing at a massive canvas that looked like someone had thrown paint at it during a temper tantrum. "I think it would look better as a load-bearing wall," he said, completely serious. I laughed so hard I spilled red wine on my white dress. He offered me his jacket to cover the stain, then took me to dinner to apologize for making me laugh. By the end of the night, I was half in love with his honesty, his stability, his complete lack of pretension. We married 18 months later at his family's ranch outside Las Cruces. His mother, Esperanza, pulled me aside before the ceremony. "Diego is a good man," she said in her heavily accented English, "but he is like his father. Steady, reliable, maybe not so exciting, you understand?" I thought I did. I thought steady and reliable were exactly what I wanted after years of dating musicians and artists who couldn't pay their share of rent. What I didn't understand was that 25-year-old me and 35-year-old me would want very different things. The first 10 years were good, better than good. Diego's business exploded as Las Cruces grew. He designed bridges, overpasses, entire subdivisions. We bought the adobe house in the foothills, hosted dinner parties for his clients, took vacations to places I'd only seen in magazines. I played the perfect wife, supportive and charming, while Diego built an empire one blueprint at a time. But somewhere around year 11, the gratitude started to curdle. I watched friends from college starting their own businesses, pursuing passions, making names for themselves. Meanwhile, I was known as Diego's wife. My biggest accomplishment was organizing the annual Las Cruces Engineers Gala. My days were spent managing a house that was too big, planning meals for a husband who often worked late, and feeling my brain atrophy in the desert sun. "You could go back to school," Diego suggested when I complained. "Get your master's, start a business, whatever you want." But that was the problem. I didn't know what I wanted. I just knew I was drowning in the life we'd built, and Diego was too busy building actual things to notice. The resentment grew like the weeds in our xeriscaped yard, slowly at first, then all at once. Diego would come home excited about a new project, an innovative design, or a problem solved, and I'd nod while thinking about how my biggest decision that day was whether to get groceries at Albertsons or Smith's. He'd kiss me goodnight and fall asleep immediately while I lay awake scrolling through social media, watching other people live interesting lives. The breaking point came last March. Diego had been working on a massive highway project, the kind that would reshape traffic patterns for the entire region. He'd been gone more than he'd been home, and when he was home, his mind was still on load calculations and environmental impact studies. "I'm thinking of taking a promotion," he said over dinner one night. It was takeout again. Green chile enchiladas from our usual place because I hadn't felt like cooking. It would mean overseeing projects across the Southwest, more travel, but significantly more money. "More travel," I repeated. "So you'd be gone even more than you are now." "It's an incredible opportunity, Monica." This kind of position doesn't come up often. What about us? What about our marriage? He looked genuinely puzzled. What about it? This benefits both of us. Better financial security, more opportunities. More opportunities for you. What about my opportunities? What opportunities? You haven't worked in over a decade. The words hit like a slap. True words, but cruel in their casual delivery. Because I've been supporting your career. I never asked you to stop working. That was your choice. You made it impossible for me to work, moving for your projects, hosting your clients, being available whenever you needed. Monica, please. You've had a good life, a life most people would envy. A life where I'm a decoration. A pretty accessory to show off at engineer galas. That's not fair. Isn't it? We went to bed angry that night. Diego in the master bedroom, me in the guest room, both of us stewing in our separate resentments. That's when I started forming the plan. The ultimatum that would force him to see me, to value me, to choose us over his career. I spent 2 weeks preparing my speech, practiced it in the mirror like I was preparing for a TED Talk. The ultimatum was simple. Turn down the promotion and recommit to our marriage, or I wanted a divorce. Either he valued what we'd built together, or he didn't. Time to choose. The night I'd delivered it, I'd made his favorite dinner. Carne asada with homemade tortillas, the recipe his mother had taught me. I wore the red dress he'd bought me in Santa Fe, the one that made him forget about structural engineering for a few hours. I set the scene perfectly. We need to talk, I said after he'd complimented the meal. Okay. He put down his fork, gave me his full attention. Even now, I can picture his face. Concerned, but not worried, like this was a problem he could solve with the right equation. I've been unhappy for a long time, I began. This marriage has become all about your career, your success, your dreams. I've become invisible. Monica, Let me finish. I've thought about this a lot. I need you to turn down the promotion. I need you to choose us, choose me for once. We can use the money we've saved to travel, to explore new things together. Maybe I'll go back to school or start a business. But I need you here, present, committed to making this marriage work. Or, he asked quietly, or I want a divorce. The silence stretched between us like the desert highway he'd spent months designing. I watched his face cycle through emotions, surprise, hurt, anger, before settling on something I didn't recognize. You're giving me an ultimatum, he said finally. I'm giving us a chance to save our marriage. By threatening to end it? By being clear about what I need? He stood up, walked to the window overlooking the lights of Las Cruces spread below us like scattered stars. When he turned back, his expression was resolved. I'm taking the promotion, he said simply. Then you're choosing your career over our marriage. No, I'm choosing not to be manipulated. There's a difference. Manipulated? I'm trying to save us. You're trying to control me, to punish me for being successful, to make me smaller so you feel bigger. That's not... Isn't it? Have you applied to schools? Looked into starting a business? Made any effort to change your situation beyond demanding I change mine? I hadn't. But that wasn't the point. The point was that he was supposed to choose me, prove that I mattered more than concrete and steel and professional advancement. So that's it? I said. You're calling my bluff? I'm calling a lawyer, he replied. If you want a divorce, you'll get one. But not on your terms, on mine. I laughed, actually laughed. Your terms? I'm entitled to half of everything, the house, the investments, the business, plus alimony. 12 years of marriage in New Mexico means I'm set for life. We'll see about that. Those 3 words should have terrified me. Instead, I was drunk on my own power, certain that the law was on my side. Certain that Diego would cave when faced with the reality of losing half his assets. Certain that this was just another problem he'd solve by giving me what I wanted. I was wrong. Diego moved out that night, checking into a hotel downtown. By morning, he'd hired Alicia Hernandez, the shark lawyer everyone whispered about at country club luncheons. The woman who'd gotten that oil executive's wife nothing but the minimum in their divorce, despite 20 years of marriage. "I want this done quickly and cleanly," Diego told me when he came to get his things. "No drama, no games, just division of assets according to the law." "According to the law, I get half." "According to the law, you get half of community property, not half of premarital assets, not half of inherited assets, not half of the business I started before we met." My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about? Did you think I built this life without protecting it?" "Every major asset is either premarital, inherited from my father's estate, or held in trusts established before our marriage. The house? Bought with inheritance money, titled properly. The investment accounts? Premarital assets kept separate. The business? Started 2 years before we met, never commingled with community funds." But I supported you. I gave up my career." "You chose to stop working. I have 12 years of emails where I encouraged you to pursue your interests, offered to pay for school, suggested business ideas. You chose to do nothing but complain. You can't do this." "I'm not doing anything. I'm simply protecting what was mine before you decided our marriage was a transaction to be negotiated." The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. My lawyer, an overworked legal aid attorney who was all I could afford, seemed perpetually surprised by Diego's preparation. "He's documented everything," she told me. "Every asset, every conversation about your career, every dollar spent. It's like he's been preparing for this for years." "Has he?" "No, he's just thorough. It's what makes him a good engineer, unfortunately for you." In the end, I got exactly what the law entitled me to: half of the community property accumulated during our marriage, which, thanks to Diego's meticulous planning, amounted to about $70,000, and my car. No house, no business shares, no lifetime alimony, just enough to start over and a harsh lesson in the difference between assumption and reality. "You could have had everything," Diego said after the final papers were signed. "All you had to do was talk to me. Tell me you were unhappy without making it a test, without the threats and ultimatums." "I did tell you." "No, you complained, you resented, you blamed, but you never once said, 'I'm struggling and I need help figuring out my purpose.' You just demanded I make myself smaller so you'd feel bigger by comparison." He was right. I knew it even then, standing in the courthouse parking lot in the brutal May sun. But admitting it would mean admitting I'd destroyed my marriage for nothing. Diego took the promotion. Last I heard, he was overseeing projects from El Paso to Tucson, making more money than ever. He hired a housekeeper for the Adobe house, someone to manage all the things I used to handle, someone who gets paid for their work instead of resenting it. And me? I took my $70,000 and rented this studio apartment in the worst part of Las Cruces. Got a job at a call center making $15 an hour, spending my days getting yelled at by people with technical problems I barely understand. My coworkers are 20 years younger, fresh out of high school, looking at me like a cautionary tale of what happens when you don't have your life together. The money's almost gone now. Turns out $70,000 doesn't last long when you're starting from scratch. First and last month's rent, deposits, a professional wardrobe for job interviews that led nowhere. A car repair when the Mercedes I'd insisted on keeping broke down. Poor financial planning, just like my poor life planning. I see Diego sometimes around town. Las Cruces isn't that big, and engineers tend to frequent the same restaurants, the same coffee shops near the development offices. He looks good, relaxed, free. Sometimes he's with a woman. Different ones, nothing serious from what I can tell. Young professionals who have their own careers, their own lives, their own ambitions beyond being Diego's wife. "Monica?" a voice called last week at the grocery store. I turned to find Esperanza, Diego's mother, looking older but still elegant in that way women who've lived full lives manage. "Mrs. Gutierrez," I said, gripping my basket of generic brands and marked down produce. Just Esperanza, please. How are you? I'm managing. She looked at my basket, at my call center uniform, at the defeat written across my face. You know, I warned you on your wedding day. Told you Diego was steady but not exciting. What I should have said was that steady men need steady women, not anchors who sink the whole ship when they get restless. I know that now. Do you? Or do you just know you lost? The question stung because she was right. I understood I'd lost, but I'm not sure I understood why. Not really. Not in the way that would prevent me from making the same mistakes again. Can I give you some advice? She asked. I nodded, though advice was the last thing I wanted. Stop waiting for someone else to make your life interesting. Diego didn't make you boring. You did that all by yourself. She patted my arm and walked away, leaving me standing in the cereal aisle contemplating the truth of her words. I'd spent 12 years blaming Diego for my lack of purpose, my absence of passion, my boring life. But he hadn't made me stop working. He hadn't forced me to spend my days doing nothing but managing a house and resenting him for it. I'd chosen that, then blamed him for the choice. The ultimatum wasn't really about the promotion. It was about me wanting him to sacrifice something, anything, to prove I mattered, to validate my choices by making his own choices smaller. It was manipulation dressed up as communication, control disguised as caring. Now I live with the consequences. A studio apartment instead of an adobe house, a call center cubicle instead of charity galas, ramen noodles instead of carne asada. All because I couldn't have an honest conversation about my own dissatisfaction with my own choices. My phone rings. The ancient flip phone that replaced my iPhone when I couldn't afford the bill. It's my supervisor at the call center, probably calling to ask if I can cover someone's shift. I always say yes now. Extra hours mean extra money, and extra money means one more month I can delay the inevitable return to my parents' house in Albuquerque. Hello? Monica? It's Steve from work. Listen, I know it's your day off, but Carla called in sick and we're slammed. I'll be there in 20 minutes. You're a lifesaver. I'm not. I'm a 37-year-old woman who destroyed her marriage with an ultimatum, thinking I held all the cards when really I was playing poker with Monopoly money. But $22.50 an hour for overtime might mean I can afford name-brand peanut butter this week. So I pull on my scratchy polyester uniform and head to work. The bus ride takes 40 minutes. I could drive, but gas is expensive and the Mercedes needs repairs I can't afford. So I sit with the other people who've made poor life choices, watching Las Cruces pass by through smudged windows. We pass the turnoff to the foothills, to the house where I used to live. Diego's probably not even there. He travels so much now with the new position, the position I told him to turn down. I wonder sometimes what would have happened if I'd handled things differently. If instead of an ultimatum, I'd suggested counseling. If instead of demanding he turn down the promotion, I'd asked him to help me find my own passion. If instead of threatening divorce, I'd admitted I was lost and scared and needed my partner's support to find myself again. But I didn't do any of that. I issued an ultimatum, certain he'd choose me over his career. Certain that 12 years of marriage meant more than concrete and steel and professional advancement. Certain that I held the power in our relationship. The call center is indeed slammed. Angry customers who can't get their internet to work, who don't understand their bill, who want to speak to a manager I'll never become. I put on my headset and settle in for 8 hours of other people's problems, grateful for the distraction from my own. Thank you for calling Tech Connect support. This is Monica. How can I help you today? Yeah, my internet's been out for 3 days and you people keep giving me the runaround. Ugh. I listened to the complaint, following the script, offering solutions I barely understand. This is my life now. This is what I chose when I decided an ultimatum was better than honesty, when I thought manipulation was the same as communication. During my break, I stand in the parking lot and call my mother. I might need to come home for a while, I tell her. Oh, Monica, what happened to the divorce settlement? I thought you were getting half of everything. So did I. That house must be worth $1 million. It's not mine, Mom. It was never mine. I just lived there. But you were married. I was married to a very smart man who kept his assets separate. And then I was stupid enough to give him an ultimatum. Oh, honey, you can always come home. Your room is just like you left it. My high school room. 37 years old and moving back to my high school room. The thought makes me want to scream, but what choice do I have? The $70,000 is almost gone. The call center job barely covers basic expenses. And I have no skills beyond organizing charity galas for people who now whisper about me at the country club. Thanks, Mom. I'll let you know. I hang up and go back to my cubicle, back to other people's technical difficulties, back to the life I created with one spectacularly backfired ultimatum. The thing about ultimatums is they're supposed to clarify things. Either or, black or white. Choose me or lose me. What they actually do is reveal exactly how replaceable you are. I thought I was essential to Diego's life. Turns out I was just expensive furniture. Nice to have, but not necessary for the structure to stand. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd worn my best suit, the one Diego bought me for our 10th anniversary, thinking it would make me look more deserving of alimony. Judge Martinez barely glanced at me as she reviewed the settlement. Mrs. Gutierrez, do you understand the terms of this agreement? I understand that my husband hid assets. Objection, Alicia Hernandez said smoothly. Mr. Gutierrez properly maintained separate property as allowed under New Mexico law. There was no hiding, only legal financial planning. Sustained. Mrs. Gutierrez, please answer the question. Yes, I understand. Nah. What I understood was that I'd been outmaneuvered by a man I'd dismissed as boring. While I'd been planning dinner parties and nursing resentments, Diego had been consulting with financial advisors, maintaining careful records, building an impenetrable wall between his premarital assets and our community property. The court finds the proposed settlement fair and equitable, Judge Martinez continued. Mrs. Gutierrez will receive $68,432, representing half of the community property accumulated during the marriage, plus the 2019 Mercedes-Benz E-Class titled in both names. That's it? I blurted out. 12 years of marriage and that's it? Mrs. Gutierrez, please direct questions through your attorney. But my legal aid lawyer was already packing up his briefcase, eager to move on to his next case. Across the aisle, Diego sat perfectly still, no triumph on his face, no satisfaction. Just the same steady expression he'd worn while calculating load limits for bridges. After court, I found him in the parking lot, leaning against his truck, the same F-150 he'd driven since before we met. I'd always nagged him to upgrade to something more befitting his success. Now I understood why he never did. The truck, like everything else valuable in his life, predated me. Was it worth it? I asked. Was what worth it? Protecting your money. Being so calculating. Making sure I couldn't touch anything that mattered. He sighed. That familiar sound that used to precede his patient explanations of engineering principles I never bothered to understand. I wasn't protecting anything when we got married, Monica. The trusts, the separate accounts. My father set those up when I started the business. He said a man should keep his foundation secure no matter what he builds on top. So you never trusted me. I trusted you completely. That's why I never touched those accounts, never commingled funds. I was protecting our future, making sure that no matter what happened with the business, you'd be taken care of. By keeping me from it? By keeping it safe. But when you gave me that ultimatum, when you tried to force my hand with threats instead of talking to me, he shrugged. Well, turns out my father was right about keeping foundations secure. He drove away in that old truck, leaving me standing next to my Mercedes that I'd soon learn cost $800 a month to insure and maintain. The car that screamed success, but whispered debt. The real humiliation started 2 weeks later when I had to return to the country club to clean out my locker. Maria Sandoval, whose husband ran the largest construction company in Las Cruces, caught me in the parking lot. "Monica! We've missed you at the committee meetings. Are you coming back now that things are settled?" My membership was under Diego's name. "Oh." Her face shifted, pity mixed with the particular pleasure of someone watching a rival fall. "Well, I'm sure you can reapply under your own name. The individual membership is only $15,000 a year. $15,000. More than a third of what I'd have left after securing an apartment." I laughed, the bitter sound echoing off the adobe walls. "I'll think about it," I lied. "You should." Though I heard Diego's already sponsoring someone new. That young engineer from his firm? Claudia something. Pretty girl. Very accomplished. The knife twisted deeper. Not just replaced, but upgraded. A woman with her own career, her own money, her own membership-worthy accomplishments beyond organizing charity auctions. That night in my studio apartment, I did the math. Really did it, for the first time in years. $68,000 seemed like so much during the divorce, but reality hit hard. First month's rent and deposit, 3,600 utility deposits, 800 used car after the Mercedes got repossessed, 12,000 professional wardrobe for job interviews, 2,000 moving costs, 1,500 lawyer fees not covered by legal aid, 3,000. By the time I'd established my new life, I had less than 40,000 left. At my burn rate, covering rent and basic expenses while job hunting, I'd be broke in 8 months. 6 if I couldn't find work soon. The job search was its own humiliation. 12 years out of the workforce with a communications degree and no relevant experience meant starting at entry level. Every interview ended the same way. "So, Ms. Gutierrez, can you explain this gap in employment?" "I was supporting my husband's career." "I see." "And what specific skills did you develop during that time?" Event planning sounded impressive until they asked about budgets managed. Diego handled the money. Vendors negotiated with, his assistant did that. Or ROI measured, I didn't even know what that meant. Turns out, being a supportive wife doesn't translate well on a resume. He called my bluff, and I had nothing. No career to fall back on, no skills beyond being a supportive wife, no plan beyond the arrogant assumption that he'd cave. No understanding that steady men don't respond well to emotional manipulation disguised as marital needs. Now Diego travels the Southwest building things that matter while I sit in a call center in a polyester shirt that makes me itch. He's living his best life while I'm living the consequences of thinking an ultimatum was a negotiation tactic instead of a relationship ender. The ultimatum that was supposed to save my marriage destroyed it in a single evening. Not because Diego chose his career over me, but because I revealed that I saw our relationship as a power struggle instead of a partnership. That I'd rather threaten than talk. That I'd prefer control over connection. I gave him an ultimatum. He gave me exactly what I asked for. A life without him. And now I spend my days in this call center, my evenings in that water-stained studio, wondering how I misread the situation so completely. The answer is simple. I thought being a wife gave me leverage. Thought 12 years meant he owed me compliance. Thought I could force change through threats instead of creating change through action. I was wrong about all of it. And now I live with the wreckage of my own ultimatum in a studio apartment in Las Cruces, starting over at 37 with nothing but the knowledge that some bluffs should never be called. Because sometimes when you demand someone choose, they don't choose you. And sometimes that's exactly what you deserve.